Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the most peaceful thing in the entire universe. Maybe you're thinking of a quiet beach, or a forest at dawn, or the moment right before sleep takes you. But what if I told you that the most relaxing thing in all of existence might actually be a black hole? I know that sounds completely backwards. We've been taught to fear them, to see them as cosmic monsters that devour everything. But tonight, I want to share something different with you. Something that changed how I see not just black holes, but existence itself. Because once you really understand what black holes are, once you feel their truth in your bones, they stop being scary. They become the universe's most profound lullaby. Before we go any further, I need you to know something. This isn't going to be a typical science lesson. Yes, we're going to talk about physics and space and mind-bending concepts that have puzzled humanity's greatest minds. But more than that, we're going to talk about you, about letting go, about surrender, about finding peace in the incomprehensible, because that's what black holes really teach us, if we're willing to listen. I spent years being terrified of black holes. I would lie awake at night, anxiety crawling through my chest, thinking about the vastness of space and these things out there that could erase entire stars. And then, one night, exhausted and overwhelmed by everything in my life that felt too big to handle, I had a strange thought. What if the thing I was most afraid of in the universe could teach me how to finally rest? What if black holes weren't monsters at all, but teachers? That question changed everything. And tonight, I want to take you on the same journey I took. We're going to explore black holes together, but not in the way you've heard before. We're going to discover why they're the most calming, most peaceful phenomena in all of creation. Why understanding them can help you sleep better, worry less, and find a kind of cosmic peace you might not have known was possible. So get comfortable, adjust your pillow, let your body sink into whatever surface is holding you right now. Take a slow, deep breath. And let's begin this journey together into the heart of the universe's greatest mystery and its most beautiful secret. The first thing you need to know is that black holes are not holes at all. I know. The name is misleading. But stay with me, because this is where it gets beautiful. A black hole is actually an enormous amount of matter compressed into an impossibly small space. Imagine taking something as massive as our sun, with all its fire and energy and light, and compressing it down to the size of a small city, or even smaller. The gravity becomes so intense that nothing can escape it, not even light itself, and that's why we call it black, because light can't bounce off it, or escape from it to reach our eyes. But here's what makes this relaxing rather than terrifying. A black hole isn't actively hunting for things to destroy. It's not a conscious predator lurking in space. It's simply existing, being what it is, following the same laws of physics that govern everything else. It sits there, patient and eternal, only affecting things that come very close to it. In fact, if our sun were suddenly replaced by a black hole of the same mass right now, all the planets would continue orbiting exactly as they do today. We wouldn't be sucked in, we'd just be very cold and dark. The black hole would simply sit there, a quiet presence in space, bothering no one who kept their distance. There's something deeply calming about that, isn't there? The universe's most powerful object isn't aggressive, it isn't malicious. It just is. It exists in perfect equilibrium with the laws that govern reality, and everything that happens around it happens according to rules that have existed since the beginning of time. There's a profound peace in that kind of predictability, that kind of cosmic order. The universe doesn't surprise itself. That's a strange thought. But think about it for a moment. Every supernova, every collision of galaxies, every black hole consuming matter at the edge of existence, none of it is random. None of it is chaos, even when it looks catastrophic to us. The universe is simply following the script it wrote for itself 14 billion years ago. And mountains. Mountains are the stage where this script plays out in slow motion. You see, Mountains teach us something profound about patience. Not the kind of patience where you're waiting for something to happen, but the kind where you understand that everything is already happening, just on a timescale that makes our human hurry look almost comical. We live our lives in decades. Mountains live theirs in epochs. When you stand at the base of a mountain and look up, you're looking at something that was being built while dinosaurs walked the earth. You're seeing stone that was liquid when the first fish crawled onto land. The summit that touches the clouds today was once at the bottom of an ancient sea, slowly being compressed, slowly being transformed. And it's still changing now. Right now, as you listen to these words, the Himalayas are growing, about 5 millimeters a year, slower than your fingernails, but relentless. India continues its patient collision with Asia, and the mountains respond the only way they know how, by reaching higher. But here's what's beautiful. They're also eroding. At the same time, wind and water are taking them apart, grain by grain, even as they rise. It's creation and destruction happening simultaneously, and the mountain doesn't resist either process. It simply exists within both, neutral, accepting. This is what mountains understand, that we often forget that building and breaking down aren't opposites. They're partners in the same dance. Nothing lasts forever in its current form, but nothing is ever truly lost either. The mountain that erodes becomes the soil in the valley. That soil grows forests. Those forests breathe life into the air. That air shapes the weather that carves new mountains. It's a circle without beginning or end, and the mountain sits at the center of it, perfectly at peace with its role. And here's what makes that peace so profound. Mountains don't resist their place in the cycle. They don't try to stay young forever or fight against the forces that slowly wear them down. Every storm that batters their peaks, every freeze and thaw that fractures their stone, every river that carries away their sediment, the mountain accepts it all. There's a strange kind of strength in that acceptance. We spend so much of our lives resisting change, clinging to what we know, trying to hold everything exactly as it is. We fight aging, fear loss, struggle against the natural flow of things. But mountains? They've mastered something we're still learning. They understand that change isn't the enemy. It's just another part of existence. Think about the way a mountain weathers. When water seeps into a crack and freezes, it expands with tremendous force enough to split solid rock. That tiny fracture becomes a crevice, then a gap, then eventually a pathway for plants to take root. What seems like damage is actually transformation. The mountain isn't being destroyed. It's being reshaped, becoming something new while remaining fundamentally itself. Buddhist monks have long used mountains as symbols in meditation practice. They speak of mountain mind, stable, unshakable, present. But here's the beautiful paradox, that stability doesn't come from rigidity. It comes from being so deeply rooted that surface changes don't matter. A storm can rage across a peak, but 500 feet down, the stone doesn't even feel it. You can develop that same quality, not by becoming hard or unmovable, but by understanding what's essential and what's just weather passing through. The mountain doesn't panic when clouds obscure its summit. It knows the clouds will move. It's still there, solid and real, whether anyone can see it or not. That's the kind of presence worth cultivating, not loud, not demanding attention, just there, reliably, steadily there. The mountain doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to prove its worth. Its existence is enough. And when you understand that, when you really let it sink in, something shifts. Because you realize that the same is true for you. You don't need to optimize every moment. You don't need to have a side hustle and a morning routine and a personal brand and a 5-year plan that accounts for every possible contingency. The pressure to constantly improve, to always be leveling up, to treat your life like a project that needs managing, it's exhausting. And more than that, it's a trap. Because here's what nobody tells you. The pursuit of self-improvement can become its own form of self-rejection. Every time you tell yourself you need to be better, you're implicitly saying that who you are right now isn't enough. Every goal you set from a place of inadequacy just reinforces the belief that you're inadequate. I'm not saying growth is bad. I'm not suggesting you should never want to change or learn or evolve. Growth is natural. It happens on its own when you're actually engaged with life, when you're curious, when you're paying attention. But that's different from the relentless self-optimization culture we've built. That's different from treating yourself like a machine that needs constant upgrades. Think about a tree. A tree grows, yes, but it doesn't grow because it's ashamed of being small. It doesn't develop new branches because it read an article about the 5 habits of highly effective trees. It grows because that's what trees do. Growth is a natural expression of being alive, not a frantic attempt to escape being inadequate. The same applies to you. When you stop trying so hard to be someone else, someone more disciplined, more successful, more whatever, you create space for actual growth, the kind that's organic, the kind that fits who you actually are, not who Instagram says you should be. You start making choices based on genuine interest instead of obligation. You stop forcing yourself into habits that don't suit you just because they worked for someone else. You realize that maybe you don't need to wake up at 5 a.m. Maybe you don't need to journal every day, or meal prep every Sunday, or have a color-coded productivity system. Maybe you just need to be yourself, with all the beautiful inefficiency that entails. Because here's what nobody tells you about self-improvement. It's supposed to make your life better, not become your life. It's supposed to be a tool you use, not a cage you live in. And somewhere along the way, we forgot that. We turned self-improvement into self-surveillance. We started tracking everything: our steps, our sleep cycles, our water intake, our mood patterns, our productivity scores. We gamified our existence until we became both the player and the game, constantly trying to beat our own high score in a competition that has no finish line. And the irony? All this optimization has made us less efficient at the things that actually matter. We're so busy tracking our morning routines that we forget to actually experience our mornings. We're so focused on optimizing our relationships, reading the books, learning the love languages, implementing the communication frameworks that we forget to just be present with the people we love. I remember reading about this CEO who tracked every 15-minute block of his day, every single one. He knew exactly how much time he spent in meetings, answering emails, eating lunch, even using the bathroom. He had spreadsheets, color-coded spreadsheets. And you know what he said in an interview? He said he felt more productive than ever, but couldn't remember the last time he felt alive. That's the trade-off nobody warns you about. You can optimize yourself into oblivion. You can become the most efficient version of yourself while simultaneously becoming the most disconnected. Because life isn't supposed to be efficient. Love isn't supposed to be optimized. Joy doesn't care about your KPIs. Some of the best moments of your life will happen during time that a productivity guru would call wasted. The long conversations that meander nowhere, the spontaneous detours, the lazy afternoons where you accomplish absolutely nothing except existing. Because here's what the optimization mindset doesn't tell you. Connection requires inefficiency. Depth requires detours. Understanding requires wandering. You can't schedule a moment of genuine connection the way you schedule a quarterly review. You can't optimize your way into intimacy. The conversations that actually matter, the ones that change how you see yourself or someone else, they don't happen in the 20-minute slot you blocked out between meetings. They happen at 2 a.m. when you were supposed to be asleep. They happen when you miss your exit because you're too caught up in what your friend is saying. They happen in the margins, the pauses, the supposedly wasted space. I think about this a lot when I see people talk about maximizing their relationships, networking efficiently, building strategic friendships, optimizing family time. And I get it, time is finite. We want to make it count. But there's something deeply sad about approaching human connection like a portfolio you're managing. This person adds value here. This relationship has diminishing returns. This friendship isn't aligned with my current goals. Because the truth is, Some of your most important relationships won't make sense on paper. Some of the people who shape you most profoundly will do absolutely nothing for your career, your status, or your 5-year plan. That coworker who's terrible at their job but makes you laugh until you cry. The neighbor who talks too much but notices when you're having a hard week. The old friend from high school who has nothing in common with who you've become, except that they knew you before you became it. These relationships don't optimize anything. They don't move needles or drive metrics. They're just human, messy, and inefficient, and completely irreplaceable. And the same goes for how you spend time with the people you love. The best practices for quality time all sound reasonable: be present, minimize distractions, make it meaningful. But sometimes the most meaningful thing you can do is absolutely nothing together. Sitting in comfortable silence, scrolling your phones in the same room, taking a walk without any destination or purpose except moving your bodies through space while existing near each other. These aren't lesser forms of connection. They're actually the foundation of it, because intimacy isn't performed. It's accumulated. It builds up slowly, like sediment forming rock over millions of years, layer after layer of ordinary moments, compressed into something solid you can stand on. And here's what nobody tells you about this kind of love. It's remarkably unsexy, at least in the way our culture defines sexy. There's nothing cinematic about grocery shopping together. Nothing Instagram-worthy about lying on opposite ends of the couch, feet touching in the middle, each absorbed in your own book. Nothing that makes a good story at dinner parties about the time you both got food poisoning and took turns holding each other's hair back. But these moments, they're the actual substance of a life shared with another person. Because real intimacy means someone sees you when you're boring, when you're cranky for no good reason, when you're sitting at the kitchen table paying bills and your face is doing that thing it does when you're concentrating and you're not aware anyone's watching, and you're just being a person, existing without performance or presentation. That's the thing that actually matters. Not whether they see you at your best, but whether they see you at your most ordinary, and stay. The myth tells us love is about finding someone who elevates you, who brings out your best self, who inspires you to reach higher. And sure, that can be part of it, but mostly, love is about finding someone who can tolerate your most regular self, your medium self, your Tuesday afternoon self who hasn't showered yet and is eating cereal for dinner and has no particularly interesting thoughts or feelings, your default factory settings, because you can't maintain best self-energy indefinitely. Nobody can. Eventually you run out of charm and wit and the ability to be on. Eventually you're just tired. And the question becomes, is there someone who likes you anyway? Not despite your ordinariness, but including it. Someone who isn't waiting for you to be fascinating again. That's the relationship that lasts. Not the one that burns brightest, but the one that stays lit when you stop adding fuel. Because here's what nobody tells you about the chemistry everyone's obsessed with. It's usually just recognition. You're not feeling drawn to them. You're feeling drawn to a familiar pattern. The unavailable person who reminds you of the parent who was emotionally distant. The chaotic relationship that feels like home, because home was chaotic. The partner who needs fixing because you learned love meant earning it through service. That electricity? Often it's just your nervous system recognizing the game it knows how to play. I watched this happen with someone close to me. She kept dating the same guy. Different face, different job, different city, but same emotional blueprint. Charming, inconsistent, just unavailable enough to keep her reaching. And every time, she'd describe it the same way. I just feel this incredible connection. What she was feeling was the comfort of a familiar wound. The partner who actually loved her well, the one who showed up, communicated clearly, was available and consistent. She described him as nice but no spark, because her system had been trained to recognize love as something you chase, not something that chooses you back. This is why the right person, wrong time narrative is so seductive. It lets us believe the chemistry was real, just mistimed. But usually, Right person, wrong time just means someone I was attracted to who couldn't meet me in reality. And we call that timing because it sounds more romantic than incompatibility. Real compatibility isn't fireworks. It's someone whose nervous system can regulate with yours. Someone whose attachment style can dance with yours without anyone getting stepped on. Someone who doesn't trigger your survival responses and call it passion. You know what's actually rare? Meeting someone and feeling calm. Meeting someone and noticing your breath deepens instead of catches. Someone whose presence doesn't activate you, but settles you. We've been taught that feeling means chemistry, but sometimes calm is the chemistry. Sometimes safe is the spark. Just a different kind. The kind that doesn't burn out because it was never trying to consume you. And maybe that's what we get wrong about safety in relationships. We think it's boring. We think it's settling. We think it's the thing you choose when you're too tired to feel anything big anymore. But safe doesn't mean small. Safe means you can actually be times big. You can expand. You can take up space. You can show the parts of yourself you've kept hidden because you weren't sure they'd be welcomed. I think about the difference between a house and a home. A house can be beautiful, thrilling, even high ceilings, dramatic architecture, floor-to-ceiling windows that let in all that dangerous light. But a home is where you don't have to perform, where you can be tired, where you can be sick, where you can be unimpressive and still belong. That's what safe love offers. It's not the absence of passion. It's the presence of permission. Permission to rest, permission to grow, permission to change your mind, permission to have a bad day without it becoming evidence that everything is falling apart. I knew someone once who said their partner made them feel like a museum piece, beautiful, admired, but never touched in any way that mattered. Everything was about the display, the aesthetic, the story other people saw. And I knew someone else who said their partner made them feel like a garden, tended to, watered during dry seasons, celebrated when they bloomed, but not abandoned when they didn't. That second person, they stayed. Because safe isn't about being handled carefully like you might break. It's about being known well enough that care becomes specific, intuitive, real. It's someone remembering you don't like being touched when you first wake up. It's someone knowing the difference between when you need advice and when you just need to be heard. It's someone understanding that your silence isn't rejection, it's just how you process. Safe is granular. It lives in the details that only attention can reveal. And here's the thing about choosing that kind of love. It requires you to know yourself first. You can't recognize safety if you don't know what actually makes you feel unsafe. You can't ask for what you need if you've never stopped to figure out what that is. So many of us are walking around with someone else's definition of love still running the show. And here's what really messes with you. Those definitions were installed when you were too young to question them. A kid doesn't have the cognitive framework to say, "Actually, Mum, this pattern of guilt tripping doesn't align with secure attachment theory." You just absorb it. You think that's what closeness feels like. That anxiety in your chest when someone's upset becomes synonymous with caring. That walking on eggshells becomes your baseline for intimacy. So you grow up, and you meet someone who's actually calm. Someone who doesn't explode or withdraw. Someone who says what they mean and means what they say. And it feels wrong. Not because it is wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. Your nervous system literally doesn't recognize it as love because there's no adrenaline spike, no cortisol flood, no desperate attempt to fix something that's breaking. We mistake intensity for intimacy. We mistake anxiety for chemistry. We think if it doesn't hurt a little, if we're not constantly wondering where we stand, then maybe it's not real. Maybe it's boring. Maybe we're settling. But that's the wound talking. That's the adaptation you made to survive your early environment, trying to convince you that peace is somehow a red flag. And the really insidious part? We don't just seek out what's familiar in romantic relationships. We do it everywhere. We pick the boss who never quite approves of us, trying to finally earn what we couldn't earn from a parent. We befriend the person who's unreliable, always giving us just enough attention to keep us hooked but never enough to feel secure. We structure our entire lives around trying to resolve something that happened 20 years ago with people who might not even be alive anymore. You're not crazy for doing this. You're human. You're wired for pattern recognition and completion. Your brain is just trying to finally get it right, to prove that you can be loved the way you needed to be loved back then. But here's the hard truth. You can't resolve the past by recreating it. You can't heal an old wound by getting a different person to hurt you the same way and hoping this time it turns out differently. The only way to truly heal is to recognize the pattern for what it is. A loop your nervous system keeps running because it mistakenly believes that survival depends on solving this one impossible equation. Your body thinks if it can just get this one type of person to stay, to choose you, to see your worth, then you'll finally be safe. Then you'll finally be enough. But you already are enough. You always were. The problem was never you. The problem was that you were a child who needed things that weren't given, and now you're an adult who's still waiting for permission to stop trying to earn what should have been freely offered. You're still auditioning for a role you already deserved just by being born. And I know this might sound overly simple, maybe even dismissive, but the shift begins when you stop trying to get people who can't see you to finally open their eyes. It begins when you redirect all that effort, all that analysis, all that hope toward people who already show up. People who don't make you guess. People who don't require you to perform or prove or perfect yourself into being worthy of basic respect and care. Because here's what happens when you finally choose someone available. At first, it feels wrong. It feels boring. It feels like something's missing. Your nervous system literally doesn't recognize safety because safety wasn't what you learned to associate with love. You learned to associate love with anxiety, with uncertainty, with the constant need to monitor and adjust and interpret. So when someone is just there, when they call, when they say they will, when they're happy to see you without you having to orchestrate it, when they don't punish you with distance for having needs it barely even registers as romantic interest. There's no high because there's no fear. There's no relief because there was no terror before it. Your brain keeps waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the test you're supposed to pass, for the moment they reveal that their affection was conditional all along. And when that moment never comes, when they just keep being consistent, you might even start creating problems just to generate the familiar feeling of anxiety. Because at least anxiety is something you know how to do. At least panic is a state you've mapped. You know where all the exits are in that room. But peace? Peace is a foreign country where you don't speak the language, where you keep waiting for someone to check your papers and tell you that you don't belong. So you test them, not consciously, maybe, but you start showing up a little late. You cancel plans last minute. You pick small fights about nothing. You wait to see if they'll finally prove that they're like everyone else, that their patience has limits, that their acceptance has fine print. And here's the cruelest part. Sometimes they do eventually pull away. Not because they didn't care, not because you were right about being unworthy, but because you kept setting the relationship on fire just to see if they'd stay in the burning building. The pattern repeats with different people, different scenarios, same underlying mechanism. A mentor believes in your potential, so you sabotage the opportunity before they can discover you're a fraud. A friend group welcomes you warmly, so you withdraw before they can exclude you. A therapist shows genuine compassion, so you stop going to sessions because you've decided you're wasting their time on someone as broken as you. This is what emotional abandonment does. It doesn't just take away the people who should have been there. It takes away your ability to recognize when people are actually there. It installs faulty pattern recognition software in your brain that sees danger in safety, finds threats in tenderness, interprets consistency as the calm before the storm. And you can know all of this intellectually. You can read the books, understand the psychology, recognize the patterns as you're living them. But knowing why you're doing something doesn't automatically give you the power to stop, because these responses aren't happening in the logical part of your brain. They're happening in the part that learned, when you were too young to defend yourself, that people leave, that love is conditional, that your needs are too much, that the safest thing to do is need nothing and expect no one. And the cruelest part? This belief system becomes self-fulfilling. You withdraw before anyone can disappoint you. You decline invitations to protect yourself from potential rejection. You keep conversations surface level because depth feels dangerous. And then, predictably, relationships remain shallow. Connections stay fragile. You feel isolated not because you're unlovable, but because you've built walls so high that love can't reach you. I've watched this pattern destroy friendships that could have been lifelong. One person carrying a wound from childhood, convinced that everyone leaves eventually, starts pulling away the moment things get real. They cancel plans, stop returning calls, become suddenly busy, right when vulnerability would deepen the bond. And their friend, confused and hurt by the withdrawal, eventually stops reaching out. The anxious person then nods to themselves. See, I knew they'd leave, but they don't see their own hand in the departure. They don't recognize that their withdrawal created the very abandonment they feared. This is what psychologists call a self-fulfilling prophecy. Your expectation of rejection causes you to behave in ways that invite rejection. Your belief that you're too much makes you withhold yourself until you become too distant. Your fear that no one will stay causes you to leave first, again and again, in 1,000 small ways. And here's what makes this particularly painful. You're often completely unaware you're doing it. The mechanisms run silently in the background. You don't think, I'm sabotaging this connection because of childhood wounds. You think, they're probably annoyed with me anyway, or I don't want to bother them, or they have better things to do. The conscious mind produces rational-sounding excuses, while the unconscious pulls the strings. The attachment system doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send you a notification, warning you are now withdrawing due to activated abandonment fears. It simply makes withdrawal feel necessary, urgent, like self-preservation. It floods you with anxiety when someone gets close, and then offers relief through distance, and you follow that relief like a compass, not realizing it's leading you in circles. This is why avoidant attachment isn't just about keeping people at arm's length. It's about living in a permanent state of emotional contradiction. You want connection, but connection feels like danger. You crave intimacy, but intimacy triggers every alarm system in your body. So you develop strategies, ways to be close without being vulnerable, ways to appear open while remaining hidden. You become excellent at shallow connection. You can share facts about yourself without revealing anything that matters. You can be charming, funny, engaging, as long as the conversation stays in safe territory. You learn to redirect. Someone asks how you really feel, and you deflect with humor, or change the subject, or turn the question back on them. It's not manipulation, it's survival. You've learned that emotional honesty is a minefield, so you walk around it. And here's what makes this particularly insidious. Avoidant attachment often looks like strength. You're independent, self-sufficient. You don't need anyone. People admire that about you. They say things like, I wish I could be more like you, you're so together, so unbothered by drama. And part of you takes pride in that image. But underneath, there's a quieter truth. It's not that you don't need people. It's that needing people feels so dangerous, you've convinced yourself you don't. You've built an entire identity around not needing. And now that identity is both your protection and your prison. Because if you admit you need someone, you have to dismantle everything you've told yourself about who you are. You have to acknowledge that the fortress you built isn't strength, it's fear, wearing a different costume. And the relationships you do maintain, they're often with people who don't ask too much of you. People who are emotionally unavailable themselves, or who are comfortable with distance, or who are so anxious for connection that they'll accept whatever scraps of intimacy you offer. Not because you're cruel, but because these dynamics feel manageable. They don't trigger your abandonment wounds because they never get deep enough to touch them. But then, something shifts. Maybe you meet someone who sees through your defenses, someone who isn't satisfied with surface-level connection, who gently but persistently asks you to show up more fully. And that's when the real battle begins. Because now you're not just managing your own comfort levels, you're navigating someone else's needs, someone else's expectations, someone else's entirely valid desire for reciprocity and depth. And this is where the internal narrative gets really loud. They're asking too much, it whispers. This is moving too fast. I'm not ready. Maybe I'll never be ready for what they want. And here's the thing that makes this particularly painful. You might actually really care about this person. This isn't about lacking feelings. It's about feeling so much that the vulnerability required to express it properly feels like standing naked in a spotlight. So you retreat into what's familiar, the measured response, the carefully controlled revelation, the emotional portion size you've deemed safe. But they feel it. Of course they feel it. They feel the distance you're maintaining, the walls you keep rebuilding overnight, even after moments of genuine connection. And when they express hurt or frustration, your defense mechanisms kick into overdrive. You intellectualize. You explain your boundaries, your need for space, your complicated relationship with intimacy, all of which might be completely true and valid, but it's also is protection. It's keeping them at arm's length while technically doing everything right. Some people accept this. They adjust their expectations, resign themselves to a connection that exists within your carefully defined parameters. And sometimes this works. Sometimes this is exactly what both people need. A relationship that honors individual boundaries and doesn't demand constant emotional intensity. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But other times, you watch something wither. You watch someone who initially sparkled with interest gradually dim, not because they stopped caring, but because one-sided emotional labor is exhausting. Because constantly wondering if you're allowed to get closer, constantly testing whether today is a day you'll let them in, slowly erodes their sense of security. And eventually, they reach a fork. They decide that loving you, even caring about you, requires more consistency than you're willing to offer. So they step back, not always dramatically, often quietly. They stop initiating. They mirror your distance. They protect themselves the way you've been protecting yourself all along. And here's the cruelest irony. When they do pull back, when they finally stop trying so hard, you feel it. You notice. The very distance you created suddenly feels like abandonment. You might even feel hurt, confused about why they're not as warm anymore, why they don't text first, why the invitations stopped coming. You might interpret their self-preservation as rejection, never quite connecting it to the walls you built, the tests you administered, the inconsistency you normalized. This is the hidden cost that sneaks up on you. You think you're just protecting yourself, maintaining boundaries, staying safe. But boundaries and walls aren't the same thing. Boundaries say, this is how I need to be treated. Walls say, don't get close enough to treat me any way at all. Boundaries are communicated and negotiated. Walls are silent and absolute. And the tragedy is, the people who would have respected your boundaries, who would have moved at your pace if you'd just named it, are the same people your walls keep out. Your defenses can't differentiate between someone who means harm and someone who means well but doesn't know how to navigate your silence. So everyone gets the same treatment, the same unpredictability, the same distance, the same tests, and the good ones eventually stop taking the exam. And here's what makes it even more complicated. Avoidant attachment doesn't just protect you from getting hurt. It also protects you from having to see yourself clearly. Because if you never let anyone get close enough to truly know you, you never have to confront the parts of yourself you're afraid might be unlovable. Your isolation becomes a kind of shield against self-awareness. You can tell yourself the story that people just don't understand you, that they're not worth the effort, that you're better off alone, and as long as no one gets close enough to challenge that narrative, it remains intact. But intimacy? Real intimacy demands honesty, not just with the other person, but with yourself. It requires you to be seen in your entirety, the competent parts and the struggling parts, the generous moments and the selfish ones, the days you show up fully and the days you barely show up at all. And for someone with avoidant attachment, that level of visibility feels like standing naked in a spotlight. It's exposing in a way that feels fundamentally unsafe. So you develop these elaborate systems to maintain distance while still technically being in relationship. You'll be available for the fun parts, the adventures, the laughter, the physical connection, but the moment things turn toward emotional depth, you've got an exit strategy ready. Maybe it's work. Maybe it's suddenly needing space. Maybe it's picking a fight about something trivial, so you have a reason to withdraw. The specifics don't matter. The pattern does. You've become a master at being present without actually being there. And the cost of this? It's not just that you miss out on deep connection, though you do. It's that you start to hollow yourself out. Because when you're constantly managing distance, constantly calculating how much to reveal and how much to withhold, constantly monitoring for signs that someone's getting too close, you're not actually living. You're performing. You're curating. You're presenting a version of yourself that feels safe to show, while keeping the real you locked away somewhere even you can't always access. The deep loneliness of avoidant attachment isn't the loneliness of being physically alone. It's the loneliness of being surrounded by people who think they know you but don't. It's the loneliness of having relationships that look fine from the outside but feel empty on the inside. It's the loneliness of celebrating achievements with people who've never seen you cry. It's the loneliness of being comforted by someone who doesn't know what actually scares you. You can be at your own birthday party, surrounded by friends and family singing to you, and feel like you're watching it all happen to someone else. Because the version of you they're celebrating isn't the real you, it's the version you've allowed them to see. And here's what makes this particularly painful. You can't even explain it to them. How do you tell someone, "I feel lonely with you," without it sounding like an accusation? How do you say, "You don't really know me," to someone who's been in your life for years? The words themselves feel like an attack, even though what you're really trying to express is your own internal experience. So you stay quiet, you keep the performance going, and the loneliness deepens. This is where the real cost of avoidant attachment reveals itself. It's not just that you struggle with intimacy in romantic relationships, though that's certainly part of it. It's that you struggle with genuine connection in every relationship. Your friendships remain surface level even after years. Your family knows facts about your life but not truths about your heart. Your colleagues see your competence but not your humanity. You become, in essence, a well-functioning mystery. People can work with you, laugh with you, even live with you, without ever really knowing you. And the tragedy is that this is exactly what your nervous system was designed to create. Safety through distance, protection through performance, survival through self-concealment. The attachment system that formed in your childhood to keep you safe has become the very thing that keeps you isolated. The strategy that once protected you now imprisons you. You've built walls so high and so convincing that even you sometimes forget they're there until those moments hit. Those quiet moments when the performance ends and you're alone with yourself, wondering why everything feels so empty despite looking so full. The exhaustion of it all is perhaps the most quietly devastating part. Because maintaining a false self isn't just emotionally draining, it's physically, mentally, spiritually depleting in ways that compound over years. You wake up tired, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the bone-deep fatigue of someone who's been performing for an invisible audience that never stops watching. Every interaction becomes a calculation. Before you speak, there's this split-second processing. Is this the right thing to say? Will this make me seem weak? Does this fit the image? You're running multiple programs simultaneously, the authentic impulse, the filter, the projection, the damage control. It's like trying to have a conversation while simultaneously translating it into 3 different languages and analyzing each word for hidden meanings. And here's what makes it so insidious. You get good at it. Frighteningly good. The mask becomes so practiced that you can deploy it instantly, automatically. Someone asks how you're doing, and before your actual feelings even register, the mask is already answering, "I'm great. Thanks." Smile, deflect, ask about them. The machinery runs so smoothly you don't even notice it's operating. But your body notices. Your body keeps the score in ways your conscious mind tries to ignore. The tension that lives permanently in your shoulders. The jaw you clench without realizing until your teeth ache. The stomach that churns before social events. The exhaustion that no amount of sleep seems to touch. The headaches that arrive like clockwork. Your body is trying to tell you something your false self won't let you hear. This isn't sustainable. The false self operates on a deficit model. It's constantly spending energy it doesn't have, borrowing against a future that can't repay it. Every interaction drains you because you're not just being present, you're monitoring, adjusting, performing, analyzing. You're living in a state of perpetual hypervigilance, always scanning for threats to your carefully constructed image. And here's what most people don't realize about hypervigilance. It doesn't just exhaust you mentally. It rewires how you experience reality itself. When you're constantly scanning for threats, your brain starts finding them everywhere. A delayed text response becomes evidence of abandonment. A casual comment gets dissected for hidden meanings. Someone's distracted mood must be about something you did. Your nervous system is stuck in a state of alarm, interpreting neutral events as dangerous because it's been trained to expect rejection. This is why authenticity feels so risky when you're caught in this cycle. Being real means you can't control how others perceive you. It means accepting that some people won't like you, won't understand you, might even judge you, and that their reaction says more about them than it does about your worth. But when your self-esteem is outsourced to other people's approval, that kind of vulnerability feels like standing naked in a spotlight. Of course you'd rather perform. At least performing gives you the illusion of control. But here's the devastating irony. The more you perform, the more isolated you become. Because even when people praise you, even when they seem to accept you, there's this quiet voice in the back of your mind whispering, they don't really know you. They like the version you're showing them. If they saw the real you, the messy, uncertain, flawed you, they'd leave. So every compliment feels hollow. Every connection feels conditional. You're surrounded by people but completely alone, because nobody actually knows who you are. You won't let them. And the longer this goes on, the more you forget who you actually are beneath the performance. The mask becomes so familiar that you can't remember what your real face looks like. You've spent so much energy becoming what others want that you've lost touch with what you want, what you feel, what you believe when nobody's watching. Your entire sense of self becomes this fragmented collection of roles you play for different audiences, and there's no coherent center holding it all together. It's like living as a committee instead of a person. There's the version of you that shows up at work competent, agreeable, never too loud or too quiet. There's the version that exists in your family still playing roles assigned decades ago. The responsible one or the funny one or the one who doesn't cause trouble. There's the version you present to friends, each friendship getting a slightly different edit of who you are. And somewhere beneath all these performances, there might be an authentic you, but you've buried it so deep under all the adaptations that you're not sure it still exists. The exhaustion of this kind of living is profound. It's not just physical tiredness, though that's certainly part of it. It's a bone-deep weariness that comes from constantly monitoring yourself, constantly adjusting, constantly second-guessing whether you're getting it right. You finish a conversation and immediately replay it in your mind, analyzing every word you said, wondering if you revealed too much or not enough, if you came across the right way. You lie awake at night thinking about an interaction from 3 days ago, convinced you said something wrong, convinced people are judging you, And here's what makes it even harder. Sometimes the mask works. Sometimes you do get the approval you're seeking. Someone compliments you, values you, includes you. And that hit of validation feels so good in the moment that it reinforces the entire system. It tells you that yes, this is what you need to keep doing, keep performing, keep adapting, keep hiding. The approval becomes addictive, and you start chasing it harder, refining your performance, becoming even more skilled at reading rooms and adjusting yourself accordingly. But the satisfaction never lasts. It can't, because it's not actually about you, it's about the character you're playing. You can collect 1,000 compliments for your performance and still feel empty inside because none of them touch the real you. They're praising someone who doesn't fully exist. And so the cycle reinforces itself. You perform, you receive validation, and instead of feeling secure, you just feel pressure to maintain the performance, because now there's an expectation. Now there are people who know you as the person you've been pretending to be, and changing course means disappointing them. It means admitting that what they liked wasn't entirely real. So you dig in deeper. You refine the character. You study what gets the best reactions and do more of that. You become, in a sense, a method actor who never breaks character, even when the cameras aren't rolling. Especially when the cameras aren't rolling. The really insidious part is that this doesn't feel like deception from the inside. It feels like adaptation. It feels like growth. You're not lying. You tell yourself you're just presenting your best self, emphasizing certain qualities, downplaying others, being strategic about how you come across. And sure, maybe that means you can't fully relax around people, and maybe you're always slightly performing, and maybe you've forgotten what your actual personality feels like beneath all the layers of self-presentation. But that's just what it means to be socially skilled. Right? That's just emotional intelligence. That's just being mature. Except mature people don't usually lie awake at night wondering who they really are. They don't feel like they're constantly one mistake away from being exposed as a fraud. They don't experience genuine connection as something that happens to other people. In some language they never quite learn to speak. The mask becomes so familiar that you stop noticing its weight. You just accept a low-level exhaustion as normal. You accept that intimacy feels vaguely threatening. You accept that you're always slightly alone, even in rooms full of people who supposedly know you. You accept that every relationship in your life feels slightly performative, like you're reading from a script someone else wrote, because you are. You're reading from the script your parents performed. The one where love means staying, where commitment means silence, where family means showing up to dinners where no one says what they actually mean. And here's what makes this particularly insidious. You probably think you've already dealt with this. You probably think because you're aware of your parents' dysfunction, because you've talked about it in therapy or with friends, because you've consciously chosen different partners or parenting styles, that you've escaped its influence. But awareness isn't the same as healing. Knowing intellectually that your parents' marriage was cold doesn't automatically teach your nervous system what warmth feels like. Understanding that they were emotionally unavailable doesn't magically give you a blueprint for healthy attachment. You can know all the right things and still flinch when someone gets too close. You can understand attachment theory backward and forward and still feel fundamentally unlovable. You can articulate exactly what was wrong with your childhood and still recreate its dynamics in every adult relationship you enter. Because this isn't about knowledge, it's about the programming that runs below consciousness, in the parts of your brain that developed before you had language. The parts that learned what love looks like by watching the two people who were supposed to model it for you. And what did they model? Maybe they modeled that love is conditional on performance, that you're valuable when you're achieving, helpful, compliant, but invisible when you're struggling or needy or complicated. Maybe they modeled that conflict is dangerous, that anger is shameful, that the appropriate response to tension is to smile tightly and change the subject. So now you're an adult who would rather die than directly address a problem, who apologizes for having needs, Who feels guilty for every boundary you attempt to set? Or maybe they modeled the opposite. Maybe they modeled that relationships are war zones, that the person who loves you is also the person who hurts you most, that intimacy and volatility are inseparable. So now you only feel truly connected to someone when there's drama, when there's intensity, when it hurts. Maybe they modeled that men are distant and women are bitter. That marriage is something you endure, not enjoy. That partnership means quiet resentment punctuated by occasional forced cheerfulness when guests come over. And here's what's so insidious about that particular model. You don't even realize you've absorbed it until you're standing in your own kitchen, having the exact same argument your parents had, using almost the same words, and suddenly you freeze because you can hear their voices coming out of your mouth. You swore you'd never be like them. You promised yourself your relationship would be different. But there you are, repeating patterns you didn't even know you'd memorized, acting out a script written decades before you were born. Because emotional modeling doesn't just show us what relationships look like, it shows us what we're worth, how we deserve to be treated, what we should tolerate, what we should expect. If you watched a parent accept being spoken to with contempt, you learned that's normal. If you saw them apologize for things that weren't their fault just to keep the peace, you learned that your needs matter less than other people's comfort. If you witnessed them stay in situations that diminished them, you learned that leaving isn't an option, that loyalty means suffering quietly. And the reverse is true too. If you never saw your parents apologize, you might not know how. If you never saw them compromise, you might think flexibility equals weakness. If you never saw them express vulnerability, you might believe that needing anything from another person is shameful. The model teaches both sides of every dynamic. Here's another layer. Sometimes the lesson isn't in what your parents did to each other. Sometimes it's in what they did to you, how they responded when you cried, whether your feelings were validated or dismissed, if your boundaries were respected or violated with a laugh and a "you're too sensitive." Those interactions taught you what emotional expression looks like, whether feelings are safe to have and share or dangerous things that need to be hidden, whether other people can be trusted with your inner world or whether vulnerability will be used against you later. A child who shares excitement and gets shut down learns to dim their light. A child who expresses fear and gets mocked learns to perform bravery even when they're terrified. A child who shows anger and gets punished learns that anger is unacceptable, so they turn it inward where it becomes depression, or hide it behind a smile where it becomes passive aggression. We learn the vocabulary of emotion from our first teachers, and if they only spoke in silence, criticism, and forced positivity, that's the only language we know. This is why so many of us reach adulthood fluent in a language that doesn't match our internal reality. We can speak "everything is fine," while our bodies are screaming in a dialect of tension, headaches, and insomnia. We're bilingual in the worst way, split between what we feel and what we're allowed to express. And here's where it gets particularly cruel. The suppression doesn't just hide the emotion, it transforms it. Unexpressed feelings don't evaporate. They ferment. They calcify. They metastasize into something darker and more difficult to recognize. The grief you weren't allowed to show doesn't disappear. It becomes a low-grade sadness that colors everything, a grey filter over your entire existence that you stop noticing because it's been there so long. The anger that had nowhere to go doesn't vanish. It turns into chronic irritability, snapping at loved ones over trivial things because the big things were never addressed. The fear you had to hide becomes generalized anxiety, a constant hum of unease with no clear source because the original threat was never validated, never processed, never resolved. Your body remembers what your conscious mind was forced to forget. This is the foundation of what we call trauma. Not just the big events, but the accumulation of moments when your authentic self was rejected, when your reality was denied, when you learned that who you really are is somehow not acceptable. And because this happens in childhood, when your brain is still developing its understanding of self and world, these patterns don't feel like learned behaviors. They feel like truth. They feel like the way things are, the way you are, the unchangeable architecture of your personality. You don't think, I was conditioned to suppress my needs. You think, I'm just not a needy person. You don't recognize, I learned to minimize my pain. You believe, I'm just tougher than others. You don't see, I was taught to distrust my perceptions. You conclude, I'm just bad at reading situations. The conditioning becomes identity, and that's when it's most dangerous, most insidious, most difficult to undo. Because once a survival strategy becomes who you are, questioning it feels like self-destruction. Changing it feels like erasing yourself. There's a strange loyalty we develop to our own coping mechanisms, even the ones that hurt us, especially the ones that hurt us. I've seen this countless times. Someone in their 30s, 40s, even 50s, suddenly recognizing a pattern they've carried their entire life. The woman who realizes she's been performing happiness for decades because sadness was punished in childhood. The man who discovers his independence is actually fear of vulnerability masquerading as strength. The person who thought they were naturally unambitious, only to realize they were systematically discouraged from wanting things. These moments of recognition are profound, sometimes devastating, because you suddenly see the before and after the child you were, before the conditioning and the person you became after. And in between, there's this vast territory of lost possibility, roads not taken, selves not explored. You wonder, who would I have been? It's an unanswerable question, but it haunts you. If I hadn't learned to shrink myself, what space might I have occupied? If I hadn't been taught that my anger was dangerous, what boundaries might I have set? If I hadn't absorbed the message that I was fundamentally flawed, what might I have attempted? These aren't idle philosophical questions. They're grief. Real, legitimate grief for the person you might have been, the childhood you deserved but didn't get, the decades spent believing the critical voice in your head was objective truth rather than inherited programming. And here's what makes this grief particularly complicated. The people who did the conditioning usually didn't mean harm. Most parents, most caregivers, most authority figures aren't malicious. They're passing down what was passed to them. They're doing their best with tools that were often inadequate, perspectives that were limited, emotional resources that were depleted. Your mother who taught you to be small wasn't trying to harm you. She was trying to protect you in a world that punished women for being too much. Your father who discouraged your emotions wasn't being cruel. He was replicating the only model of masculinity he knew. Your teachers who rewarded compliance weren't evil. They were managing overwhelming circumstances with limited support. And here's what makes this so insidious. We internalize these judgments. We don't just hear that, we're too much. We begin to believe it. We start viewing our own traits through the lens of deficiency rather than difference. The boy who can't sit still doesn't think, I have abundant physical energy that needs outlets. He thinks, I'm bad at being still. Something's wrong with me. The girl who questions everything doesn't think, I have an analytical mind that seeks deeper understanding. She thinks, I'm too argumentative. I need to be quieter. We adopt the framework of our critics and turn it inward. We become our own harshest judges, policing ourselves before anyone else has the chance. And this self-judgment doesn't disappear when childhood ends. It follows us into adulthood, whispering in moments of vulnerability, asterisk, you're too intense, too emotional, too complicated, too much, asterisk. I've watched brilliant people apologize for their enthusiasm. Passionate people dampen their fire to avoid making others uncomfortable. Creative people hide their work because it feels too revealing, too raw, too times them asterisk. The tragedy isn't just that we were told we were too much. It's that we believed it. We internalized a narrative written by people who were themselves wounded, limited, or overwhelmed. We accepted their capacity as the measure of our worth. But here's the truth that changes everything. Their reaction was never about you. It was about them, their bandwidth, their triggers, their unhealed places, their own fears of being too much. When someone tells you you're too much, what they're often really saying is, "You exceed my current capacity to hold space for you." That's information about them, not a verdict on you. The parent who called you dramatic might have grown up in a home where emotions were dangerous. The teacher who said you asked too many questions might have been taught that curiosity equals disrespect. The friend who accused you of being too intense might be terrified of their own depth. Their discomfort is real, but it's not your responsibility to diminish yourself to ease it. You are not too much. You have simply been surrounded by people with too little healing, too little space, too little permission to be fully themselves. And here's what's important to understand. When you start to reclaim your fullness, when you stop dimming your light, you're not just changing yourself. You're changing the entire dynamic around you. You're showing others, simply by existing authentically, that it's possible to take up space without apology. That permission, it ripples outward in ways you may never fully see. I think about this a lot when people talk about being intimidating. How often that word is used to describe women who are competent, articulate, direct, as if their clarity is an assault rather than a gift, as if the problem is their presence rather than someone else's discomfort with their own absence of those qualities. When someone says you're intimidating, what they're often really saying is, "You remind me of what I'm afraid to become. You reflect back to me the ways I've made myself smaller, and that confrontation is uncomfortable. But that discomfort, it's not yours to manage. It's not your job to shrink so that someone else doesn't have to confront their own self-imposed limitations. Your bigness is not a punishment for those around you. It's an invitation. It says, there's room here. There's permission here. You can expand too. And yes, not everyone will accept that invitation. Some people are so committed to their smallness, so deeply invested in the identity of being overlooked or overwhelmed, that your expansion will feel like a threat. They'll interpret your growth as judgment, your joy as arrogance, your boundaries as cruelty. And you know what? You have to let them. You have to let them misunderstand you. You have to let them write their narratives about who you are and what you mean. Because the alternative, spending your life contorting yourself to fit into someone else's limited perception that's not living, that's performing. And performances always end in exhaustion. And here's what nobody tells you about that exhaustion. It doesn't just affect you. It radiates outward. When you're depleted from constantly performing, you have nothing left to give to the people and passions that actually matter. You become a shell, going through the motions, present in body but absent in spirit. I've watched this play out in countless ways. The person who's so busy managing their reputation at work that they come home with nothing for their family. The friend who's so concerned with being liked by everyone that they can't show up authentically for anyone. The partner who's so focused on being the perfect girlfriend or boyfriend that they forget to actually be themselves in the relationship. The performance consumes everything. And for what? For the comfort of people who probably aren't even paying that much attention? Because here's a sobering truth. Most people are too wrapped up in their own lives to give your choices as much thought as you think they are. That person whose opinion you're so worried about, they're worried about someone else's opinion of them. It's a ridiculous cycle of mutual anxiety where everyone's performing for an audience that doesn't really exist. Think about the last time someone made a choice you disagreed with, maybe a career change or a relationship decision. Be honest. How long did you actually think about it? A few days? Maybe a week? And then you moved on with your life because you had your own stuff to deal with. That's how most people operate. They have an opinion, they share it if asked, or sometimes when not asked, and then they go back to their own concerns. They're not lying awake at night thinking about your choices. They're not building a case against you. They're living their lives. So why are we living ours according to their fleeting judgments? The shift happens when you realize that their approval or disapproval is just weather passing through. It's not a permanent condition. It's not a verdict on your worth. It's just their current emotional state projected onto your situation. And you don't need to take shelter from every passing storm. You can just let it rain, knowing the sun will come out again, knowing that their opinion says more about where they are than where you should be. Because here's what happens when you stop letting other people's opinions dictate your choices. You start making decisions based on what actually matters to you. Not what looks good, not what sounds impressive at dinner parties, not what makes your distant relatives nod approvingly, but what genuinely aligns with the life you want to build. And sometimes that means choosing the smaller apartment in the neighborhood you love over the bigger one in the place that impresses visitors. Sometimes it means turning down the promotion that comes with a title but steals your evenings. Sometimes it means ordering the appetizer as your main course because that's actually what you want, not because it fits some arbitrary rule about proper dining. These might sound like small things, trivial even, but they're not. Because each time you choose based on your own compass instead of someone else's map, you're building something. You're building trust with yourself. You're proving that your preferences matter, that your comfort counts, that your definition of a good life is just as valid as anyone else's. And over time, this accumulates. These small acts of self-determination add up to something bigger. They create a life that actually fits you instead of one you're constantly trying to squeeze yourself into. You start recognizing the difference between feedback that's genuinely helpful and opinions that are just noise, between advice that comes from wisdom and judgment that comes from insecurity, between people who want to help you grow and people who want to keep you small. And you realize that the most confident people you know, the ones who seem truly at peace, they're not the ones with the most impressive resumes or the most followers or the most stuff. They're the ones who decided what mattered to them and built their lives around that, regardless of whether it made sense to anyone else. They stopped measuring their worth by external metrics and started measuring it by internal ones. Do I feel aligned? Am I showing up as the person I want to be? Am I making choices that honor my values? And here's what's interesting. When you shift to that internal scorecard, you don't become less ambitious or less driven. You actually become more effective. Because you're no longer wasting energy trying to impress people who don't matter or chasing goals that don't actually fulfill you. You start to notice how much of what we call success is just elaborate peacocking, the luxury car that's really just a very expensive "please think I'm important" sign, the job title that sounds impressive at dinner parties but makes you miserable 40 hours a week, the relationship you stay in because leaving would mean admitting you made a mistake. And you realize that confidence isn't about never making mistakes, it's about being secure enough to admit when you have and to change course. I think about the people who stay in careers they've outgrown because they've already invested so much time, the sunk cost fallacy, dressed up as commitment. They tell themselves they're being responsible, being realistic, but really they're just scared. Scared of starting over. Scared of what people will think. Scared of discovering that maybe they're not as good at the thing they actually want to do as they are at the thing they've been doing. And that fear keeps them trapped in a life that looks successful from the outside but feels hollow on the inside. True confidence is being able to say, I spent 10 years building this, and it's not right for me anymore, and I'm going to walk away from it. That's terrifying. That requires a level of self-trust that most people never develop. Because it means trusting that you'll figure it out. Trusting that your worth isn't tied to any single identity or achievement. Trusting that you can handle uncertainty and discomfort and judgment. And when you develop that trust, something shifts. You stop needing permission. You stop waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect plan. You start taking action from where you are, with what you have. Because here's what most people don't realize about confidence. It's not built in moments of triumph. It's built in moments of showing up when you don't feel ready. When you honor a commitment to yourself even though no one else is watching. When you keep going despite the voice in your head listing all the reasons you should quit. Think about learning to swim. No amount of reading about swimming technique actually teaches you to swim. At some point, you have to get in the water. And yes, those first moments are uncomfortable. You swallow water, You panic a little. Your movements feel awkward and inefficient. But each time you get in, something changes. Your body learns. Your breathing adjusts. What felt impossible last week becomes automatic this week. Not because you suddenly gained some magical ability, but because you were willing to be bad at something long enough to get better. Self-trust works the same way. You can't think your way into it. You have to live your way into it. And here's the beautiful part. Every small promise you keep to yourself becomes evidence. Evidence that you're capable. Evidence that you follow through. Evidence that you can be counted on. Start small if you need to. Tell yourself you'll drink water first thing in the morning. Then do it. Say you'll take a 10-minute walk. Then take it. Promise yourself you'll write for 5 minutes. Then write. These tiny actions might seem insignificant, but they're not. They're deposits into your self-trust account. And that account compounds over time. Because when you've proven to yourself that you do what you say you'll do in small things, you start believing you can do it in bigger things. The person who honors a commitment to walk for 10 minutes starts to believe they could train for a marathon. The person who writes for 5 minutes begins to see themselves as someone who could finish a book. It's not about the size of the action. It's about the pattern you're establishing, the identity you're building, the relationship you're creating with yourself. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you become someone who trusts themselves. Not because life got easier, not because you stopped feeling fear or doubt, but because you have a track record now, a history of showing up for yourself. That history becomes your foundation, your proof, your anchor when everything else feels uncertain. And maybe that's the real purpose of all this, not to arrive at some final answer, but to build a relationship with your own mind, to understand how you think, what you value, why certain questions keep returning. Because you start to notice patterns. The same doubts that troubled you at 20 echo at 30, at 40, just wearing different clothes. The core questions remain surprisingly consistent. Am I enough? Does this matter? What if I'm wrong? But here's what changes. Your capacity to sit with them, to recognize an old visitor when it knocks, to say, yes, this particular uncertainty. We've met before. That familiarity doesn't diminish the question. It just removes some of its power to destabilize you completely. Think about how a ship's captain learns to read the ocean. They don't eliminate storms or calm every wave. They learn which signs indicate serious danger and which are just part of the water's natural movement. They develop intuition through exposure, through riding out enough conditions to know the difference between alarming and merely uncomfortable. Your thinking works the same way. The more honestly you engage with your own uncertainties, the better you become at distinguishing between productive questioning and spiraling anxiety, between genuine doubt that deserves attention and noise that can be acknowledged and set aside. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes you find that the question itself was pointing towards something deeper, that what seemed like doubt about your career was actually about how you define contribution. That what felt like uncertainty about a relationship was really about how you understand commitment. The surface question becomes a doorway. This is where thinking in the quiet truly serves you, because in conversation, in reaction, in the momentum of daily life, you tend to answer the question as asked. But alone, with time, you can interrogate the question itself. You can ask, what am I really asking here? What would actually satisfy this uncertainty? And often, you discover the original question was incomplete, that you were trying to solve the wrong problem, or seeking an answer that wouldn't actually address the underlying need. This is the work, not finding perfect answers, but developing better questions, not eliminating doubt, but learning to doubt more productively. The greatest thinkers in history weren't distinguished by having all the answers. They were distinguished by asking questions no one else thought to ask. Darwin didn't just observe finches. He asked why their beaks differed from island to island when conventional wisdom said species were fixed and unchanging. Einstein didn't just study physics. He asked what would happen if you traveled alongside a beam of light, a question that seemed absurd until it revealed the nature of space-time itself. Marie Curie didn't just accept that certain materials glowed mysteriously. She asked what caused that glow, even when colleagues dismissed it as insignificant, eventually discovering radioactivity and fundamentally changing our understanding of matter. Each of these breakthroughs began not with an answer, but with the courage to question what everyone else accepted as settled fact. And here's what makes their example so relevant to us. They didn't have special equipment for thinking. They had the same human brains we have, prone to the same biases, the same shortcuts, the same comfortable assumptions. What they had was practice. Practice noticing when their thinking had become lazy. Practice catching themselves repeating explanations they'd never actually examined. Practice sitting with uncertainty long enough to see what it might reveal. That practice is available to all of us, not as some abstract intellectual exercise, but as a daily discipline with immediate practical benefits. Because better questions lead to better decisions. Better decisions lead to better outcomes. Better outcomes lead to lives more aligned with what actually matters to us, rather than what we've been told should matter. Consider the question, how do I become successful? It sounds reasonable, ambitious even, but examine it more closely and you'll find it's built on unexamined assumptions. Successful by whose definition? In which domains? At what cost? And why that particular goal rather than something else? A better question might be, what does a life well lived mean to me? Specifically, given my actual values and circumstances. That's harder to answer. It doesn't have a clear metric, but it's also much more likely to lead you somewhere that actually satisfies you rather than somewhere you're supposed to want to be. Because the truth is, you don't owe the world a TED talk about your life. You don't need to have revolutionized anything. You don't need a legacy that echoes through generations, or a headstone that makes strangers stop and nod in respect. You're allowed to live a small life, a quiet life, a life that fits in the palm of your hand and doesn't require a documentary crew to feel meaningful. There's a woman in rural Japan named Misao who spent most of her adult life farming vegetables and caring for her grandmother. She never traveled internationally, never had children, never built a company or wrote a book. When she was in her 80s, her photographer grandson began documenting her daily life with her dog, Fukumaru. The images went viral, turned into books, exhibitions worldwide. But here's the thing. She didn't become interesting because she suddenly did something extraordinary. The photographs revealed what was already there. The tenderness in how she shared her food with her dog. The contentment in her routine. The richness of a life built from thousands of small, intentional moments. She didn't change. Our attention did. And that's the paradox. The life you're living right now, the one that feels too ordinary, too small, too unremarkable, it might already be enough. You might already be doing it right. But you can't see it because you're measuring it against metrics that were never designed for human happiness in the first place. We've been conditioned to believe that more is always better. More success, more experiences, more accomplishments, more proof that we were here and that we mattered. But more is a treadmill with no finish line. It's a hunger that grows with feeding. And here's the thing about treadmills, they're designed to keep you running in place. You can sprint at full speed, sweat pouring, heart pounding, lungs burning, and at the end of it all, you're standing in exactly the same spot where you started. The scenery never changes. The destination never arrives. The only thing that grows is your exhaustion. We convince ourselves that the next achievement will be the one that finally satisfies us. The next promotion, the next relationship, the next purchase, the next vacation, the next milestone. We tell ourselves, once I reach that, I'll be content. Once I have that, I'll be happy. Once I accomplish that, I'll finally be able to rest. But it never works that way, does it? Because the moment we reach one goal, the goalposts mysteriously shift. The promotion comes with new pressures that make us long for the next level. The relationship becomes familiar, and we wonder if there's something more exciting waiting elsewhere. The new car loses its shine within weeks, and we're already eyeing the upgraded model. The vacation ends, and we're immediately planning the next escape. This isn't a flaw in our character. It's a feature of our biology, a quirk of our evolutionary wiring. Our ancestors survived because they were never truly satisfied. They kept seeking, kept striving, kept looking for the next source of food, the next safe shelter, the next advantage. Contentment, in the harsh mathematics of survival, was a luxury that could get you killed. But we don't live in that world anymore. The threats our ancestors faced have been replaced by manufactured anxieties and artificial scarcities. The survival mechanism that once kept us alive now keeps us imprisoned in a cycle of perpetual wanting. The advertising industry understands this better than we understand ourselves. They've built a $1 trillion economy on the foundation of manufactured dissatisfaction. Every commercial, every billboard, every sponsored post is carefully engineered to make you feel that your life is somehow incomplete without their product. And it works, not because we're stupid or weak, but because they're exploiting the deepest vulnerabilities of the human psyche. Our desire for belonging, our fear of missing out, our desperate hope that happiness is just one purchase away. Think about the last time you bought something on impulse. Not groceries or necessities, but that thing you suddenly convinced yourself you needed. Maybe it was a gadget, a piece of clothing, a subscription service. Now, ask yourself, did you wake up that morning thinking about it? Or did the thought arrive fully formed after you saw an ad, watched an influencer's recommendation, scrolled past it 3 times in one day? The truth is, most of our desires aren't even ours. They're planted, cultivated, harvested. And here's what makes it so insidious. The best marketing doesn't feel like marketing at all. It feels like a friend's recommendation, a lifestyle choice, self-care. The algorithm has become so sophisticated that it can predict what you'll want before you know you want it. It studies your hesitations, your late-night browsing, the posts you linger on for 3 seconds longer than others. It builds a profile of your vulnerabilities and serves you exactly what will make you click. We've become so accustomed to being sold to that we don't even register it anymore. We call it content. We engage with it voluntarily. We share it. Some of us even defend it when others point out we're being manipulated, because admitting we've been influenced feels like admitting we're not in control of our own minds. And maybe we're not. Not entirely. Not when billion-dollar corporations employ neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists specifically to bypass our rational thinking. They're not trying to convince you, they're trying to trigger you, to activate the parts of your brain that operate below conscious awareness. This is why you can know something is bad for you and still want it. Why you can recognize an ad as manipulative and still feel the pull. Because they're not appealing to your logic. They're speaking directly to the ancient, primal parts of your brain that just want to feel safe, accepted, and happy. And those parts don't know the difference between a genuine need and a manufactured one. The cost of all this isn't just financial, though we'll get to that. The deeper cost is psychological. Every time we reach for a solution that's been sold to us, we're reinforcing the belief that fulfillment comes from external sources, that we're not enough as we are. That happiness is always just one more purchase, one more upgrade, one more transformation away. And the cruel irony is that this approach actually prevents the very fulfillment it promises. Because real contentment doesn't come from acquiring more, it comes from accepting what is, from being present with ourselves, uncomfortable feelings and all. Think about the last time you felt genuinely at peace. I'm willing to bet it wasn't while scrolling through your cart at checkout. It was probably a quiet moment, a conversation with someone you love, a walk where you weren't trying to get anywhere, a creative project you lost yourself in. These moments don't require consumption, they require presence. But presence doesn't generate revenue. Presence doesn't need a subscription model. Presence can't be packaged, branded, and sold back to you at a markup. So instead, we're taught to fear it, to fill every moment of potential stillness with content, with productivity, with self-improvement. We're told that an unexamined life isn't worth living, but what they really mean is that an unmonetized life isn't worth marketing to. The wellness industry alone is worth over $4.5 trillion globally. $4.5 trillion spent on the pursuit of feeling better. And yet, rates of anxiety, depression, and burnout continue to climb. We're more well than ever, according to our purchase history, but we're not actually feeling any better. Because we're addressing symptoms while ignoring the disease. The disease is the belief that we're broken, that we need fixing, that our natural state requires constant intervention and improvement. What if the opposite were true? What if you're not broken? What if your stress isn't a deficiency of adaptogens? What if your dissatisfaction isn't a lack of the right planner or morning routine? What if it's actually a rational response to living in a system that extracts your labor, monetizes your attention, and profits from your insecurity? There's a concept in psychology called depressive realism, the idea that people experiencing depression often see certain situations more clearly than their optimistic peers. They're not delusional. They're not catastrophizing. They're accurately assessing how little control they have, how arbitrary many outcomes are, how much of success is just luck and timing. And wellness culture looks at that clarity and calls it a symptom. It tells you that seeing reality clearly is a chemical imbalance that needs correcting, that your accurate assessment of systemic problems is just limiting beliefs, that if you're anxious about climate change, economic instability, or social collapse, you just need to journal more mindfully. It's gaslighting dressed up in pastel Instagram squares. Because here's what they won't tell you. Your body is supposed to respond to threat. That's not dysfunction. That's actually your nervous system working exactly as designed. When you're overworked, underpaid, and watching the world burn while billionaires cosplay as astronauts, cortisol is the correct biological response. Your anxiety isn't irrational, it's information. Your exhaustion isn't laziness, it's your body refusing to be complicit in its own exploitation. Your inability to manifest your way out of poverty isn't a vibration problem, it's literally how economic systems work. But wellness culture needs you to believe otherwise. Because if you started asking structural questions instead of personal ones, if you started organizing instead of optimizing, if you directed your energy toward collective action instead of individual transformation, well, that would be bad for business. So, they keep you focused inward, convinced that you're always one purchase, one practice, one breakthrough away from the peace you're seeking. They've monetized your hope and packaged your desperation. And the cruelest part, they've made you feel guilty for noticing, for being tired of performing wellness, for wanting rest that doesn't require a premium subscription. But here's what they don't tell you about real rest. It's not something you can optimize your way into. It's not a productivity hack. It's not about finding the perfect morning routine or the ideal sleep tracking device. Real rest is subversive because it refuses to justify itself. You don't need to earn it. You don't need to prove you've worked hard enough to deserve it. You don't need to measure its ROI or track how it improves your performance metrics. Rest is not a tool for becoming a better worker. It's an act of being human. And that's exactly why capitalism fears it so deeply. Because when you rest without guilt, without purpose, without tracking every minute for future productivity gains, you're stepping outside the entire system. You're refusing to be a resource that can be extracted from. You're just being. And being has no market value. Being doesn't generate profit. Being doesn't scale. That terrifies them. So they've spent decades convincing you that being isn't enough, that you're only valuable when you're doing, producing, performing. Even your rest must be productive. But I want you to consider something radical. What if you took a nap this afternoon and didn't tell anyone about it, didn't track it, didn't optimize it, didn't follow a specific nap protocol designed by a sleep scientist, just slept? What if you spent an entire Sunday doing absolutely nothing of consequence? Not meal prepping for optimization, not doing yoga for wellness, not reading self-improvement books, not journaling for mental clarity, just existing in your own time, on your own terms, without apology. What if rest wasn't something you had to earn, optimize, or justify? What if it was just your right as a living being? The wellness industry doesn't want you asking these questions, because if you do, you might stop buying their solutions to the problems they've created. You might realize that you've been exhausted this whole time, not because you haven't found the right productivity system, but because the system itself is designed to exhaust you. And then what would they sell you? And the really insidious part, they've convinced us that recognizing this exhaustion is itself a form of failure, that if you're tired, you're weak, that if you need rest, you lack discipline, that if you can't keep up with the endless optimization, you're simply not trying hard enough. I see this everywhere now, in the way we apologize for taking vacations, in the way we feel guilty for spending a Sunday doing absolutely nothing, in the shame we carry for not responding to messages instantly, for not having a side hustle, for not monetizing our hobbies, for not turning every single aspect of our existence into something productive and measurable and worthy of documentation. We've internalized the voice of the productivity industrial complex so deeply that we don't even need the apps and courses anymore. We police ourselves. We judge ourselves. We exhaust ourselves on their behalf. And here's what gets me. Rest has become another thing to optimize. You can't just rest. You have to do it correctly. You need the right meditation app, the perfect sleep tracker, the optimal evening routine. You need to schedule your downtime, measure your recovery, quantify your relaxation. Even rest has become work. I downloaded a meditation app once because everyone said meditation would help with stress. You know what happened? I got stressed about whether I was meditating correctly, whether I was hitting my streak, whether my mindfulness minutes were competitive with other users. I turned inner peace into a performance metric. And that's exactly what they want, because if rest becomes another optimization project, you never actually rest. You stay in the market, you stay exhausted, you keep searching for the next solution. But what if rest doesn't need to be optimized? What if you don't need to track it, measure it, or make it productive? What if the point of rest is simply rest? What if rest isn't a problem to solve, but a state to inhabit? We've turned everything into a project. Morning routines, evening wind-downs, even our hobbies come with progression systems and skill trees. We've gamified existence to the point where simply being feels like wasted XP. But here's what I keep coming back to. The things that restore us most deeply are often the things we can't quantify. The way a conversation with an old friend leaves you feeling lighter, even though you accomplished nothing. The strange peace that comes from watching rain on a window. The complete absorption of getting lost in a book that has nothing to do with self-improvement. These moments don't optimize anything. They don't move you toward goals. They're not building your brand or expanding your network. And that's exactly why they matter. Because in a world that constantly asks, what's the ROI? Rest is the thing that answers. Not everything needs one. I think about the Sabbath traditions across cultures. One day where you simply stop. You don't catch up. You don't get ahead. You don't even try to be better. You just are. And maybe that's the permission we're really searching for. Not better sleep hacks or productivity systems. Not the perfect morning routine or the optimal wind-down protocol. Maybe we just need permission to stop performing our own lives for a while. To let the dishes sit in the sink. To leave emails unread. To disappoint the imaginary audience that's constantly judging whether we're doing enough, being enough, achieving enough. What if enough is just this, right now, exactly as it is. What if the real rest revolution isn't about doing rest better, but about remembering that we don't need to earn it at all? You're already worthy of it, not because you're productive, not because you're optimized, but because you're alive, and alive things need to rest. It's that simple. It always has been. And in that simplicity, there's a kind of freedom. You don't have to earn the right to close your eyes. You don't have to achieve a certain level of productivity, or cross enough items off a list, or prove to anyone, including yourself, that you've done enough to deserve rest. Rest isn't a reward. It's a requirement. It's woven into the very fabric of what you are. The earth doesn't apologize for rotating into darkness. The ocean doesn't justify its tides. And you don't need to explain why you need to sleep. It's written in your cells, in the rhythm of your heartbeat, in the chemistry of your brain, in the architecture of every living thing that has ever drawn breath on this planet. You are part of that lineage, that unbroken chain of life that has been resting since the beginning. And tonight, you're continuing that tradition, not because you're weak, not because you're lazy, not because you're running away from something, but because rest is how life continues, how it repairs, how it prepares for tomorrow. There's a kind of courage in letting go, in admitting that you're not infinite, that you have limits, that you need something as basic and biological as sleep. We live in a world that often mistakes exhaustion for dedication, that confuses burnout with ambition, that treats rest like a character flaw instead of a biological necessity. But you're not failing when you rest. You're not giving up. You're not falling behind. You're doing exactly what every version of yourself, from your single-celled ancestors to the complex, beautiful, thinking being you are now, has always needed to do. You're closing your eyes. You're letting your breathing slow. You're allowing your thoughts to drift like leaves on water. You're resting. And there's no shame in that. No guilt. No need to justify or explain. Just the simple, profound act of being alive and letting that life renew itself in the darkness. So, let your shoulders drop, let your jaw unclench, let the weight of the day settle into the mattress beneath you. You've carried enough, you've thought enough, you've done enough. For now, all that's left is this: the gentle pull of sleep, the quiet surrender to rest. And tomorrow, when light returns, as it always does, you'll wake, not because you forced yourself, not because you set an alarm, but because that's what living things do. They rest, they wake, they continue, one breath, one heartbeat, one night at a time. And maybe that's the most radical thing of all, recognizing that you don't need to have it all figured out before morning comes. The pressure to solve everything tonight, to find answers in the dark, to emerge transformed by dawn, it's another story we tell ourselves, another weight we carry when we should be resting. But rest itself is the answer you've been searching for, not sleep necessarily, though that would be welcome, but the deeper rest of releasing the need to perform even for yourself, the rest of letting your mind wander without purpose, the rest of existing without agenda. There's a practice in some traditions called non-doing, not laziness, not avoidance, but the conscious choice to stop striving, even mentally, for a period of time. To lie here without trying to fall asleep, without trying to solve problems, without trying to be better, different, more enlightened. Just this, just now, just breathing. It sounds simple until you try it, until you notice how much mental energy you spend trying to optimize even your rest, trying to rest correctly, trying to not try the right way. The mind loves a project, even if that project is supposedly about letting go. But what if, just for now, there were no project? What if your only job were to notice the texture of your pillow, the weight of your blanket, the quiet sounds of night around you? What if being awake right now weren't something to fix, but simply something happening, like clouds passing, like seasons changing, like the tide that goes out, always, eventually, returning. Your wakefulness will pass too, maybe tonight, maybe as dawn approaches, maybe in ways you don't expect, but it will pass because everything does. And while you're here, in this in-between place, you're doing something important even though it doesn't feel like it. You're practicing presence in discomfort. You're learning that you can be okay even when things aren't okay. You're discovering that peace doesn't require perfect conditions. These are lessons you can't learn in daylight, when everything's easier. The night teaches what the day cannot. So let it teach you. Let this moment, frustrating as it might be enough. Your breath flowing, your heart beating, your body held by the earth beneath you. This is enough. You are enough. Right here, right now, awake or asleep, striving or surrendering. Enough. And perhaps that's the gentlest place to rest tonight, in that simple truth. Not in achievement or optimization, not in tomorrow's promise or yesterday's revision, but here. In the quiet knowledge that your worth isn't something you earn with each sunrise or risk losing with each sunset. It simply is. Like gravity, like the way water finds its level, like the eternal return of seasons, indifferent to our participation or approval. You don't have to believe it perfectly. You don't have to feel it fully. The truth of your enoughness doesn't require your constant vigilance or faith. It existed before you woke this morning. It will exist after you sleep tonight. It asks nothing of you, no proof, no performance, no perfectly worded affirmation whispered into the dark. And maybe that's what lets us finally soften, finally stop. When we realize we're not holding ourselves together with sheer will and positive thinking. When we understand that the foundation was always there, beneath the striving, beneath the doubt, beneath the endless internal commentary about whether we're doing this whole existence thing correctly. We were never as fragile as we feared, never as conditional as the world sometimes suggested. The you that exists right now, tired and horizontal, thoughts drifting, defenses down this version, is no less valuable than the one who conquers mornings with optimization and intention. No less worthy than the one who feels strong, certain, ahead of schedule. Rest isn't a reward you've finally earned. It's a birthright you never lost. And the night, this night, asks nothing of you now. No transformation, no revelation, no perfectly executed surrender. Just this, the quiet permission to be exactly as you are, unfinished and whole, uncertain and worthy. Awake to these words or already drifting beyond them. Either way, you're exactly where you belong. And that, more than any fact about distant stars or ancient oceans, might be the most radical truth of all. So let it hold you now. Let the simplicity of your own enoughness be the last thought that dissolves into sleep, or doesn't, because even that doesn't matter. You're already home. You've always been home, and the only thing left to do is close your eyes.